must be a disqualification, even at the stage of bidding. We are not there, and I think those are the issues that must be strengthened in the bidding phase of major events. But for now, I think there is little in terms of the organizing association agreement or any other document that makes it part of the delivery of the event, the observance of human rights and how we treat those who work in the event. I think I've spoken too much on this.
Well, can we, thanks for the input, and I think that's been really important to give a context to the discussion we're going to have. But we're really going to go into a sort of question and answer thing, and with very short comments and answers to it, because I think what we're trying to establish is what is the relationship between mega events like the Olympics and the FIFA World Cup or the International Rugby Championship and human rights. And I think in your introduction, it's quite clear that there's actually no relationship. These events are about business. I mean, FIFA and Sepp Blatter and his executives walk away from South Africa with £2 billion tax-free. What they do with that money, I have absolutely no idea. So, and I doubt many people in the world have. Maybe you would, Danny, and that would be interesting to come to that, because, when you talk about development, and that's what we need to clarify, the relationship between development and the challenges that face billions of people in the world who don't even have food to put on their table, that will go to bed hungry today, and mega events. Because often in the sales pitch, this is what's pointed out, that in fact it's a development objective we have in hosting such a mega event. And everything you've said, from the challenges of malaria or polio on the continent, I mean, if I just take it one step further, every hour there's a jetliner that crashes somewhere in the world filled with young children who are dying of causes that are preventable. Malnutrition, pneumonia, measles, diarrhea. This is the reality of the day-to-day lives of ordinary people. And so, in a sense, if you start to looking at, say, even the Olympics, I mean, winning a gold medal is the end of a long journey, which is determined by the social status of someone. So what is their diet? What is their social environment? Does their house have electricity? Do they go to schools where they get the best education and access to the internet? And so, in fact, if you take the situation of billions of people in the world that don't have access to those basic needs, they've already lost the race. Like you're saying, that inequality of society gets reflected in sport. So I think if one is looking at the relationship between these mega events and human rights and development, it's a very tenuous linkage. And therefore, we should admit that and accept that as the reality. That in a sense of legacy, beyond the set of centers that have been set up, we are not addressing the fundamental structural root causes of poverty that rob billions of people in the world of the ability to compete in a sporting environment. But in those discussions that you are having at that very global level, is there an acknowledgement of that? Do you see that this attempt to, like at the last Olympics, to say we will convene a meeting of heads of governments and we will discuss eradicating hunger in the world? Is that genuine?
Well, I think, Jay, as you know, these commitments flow easily. And after the press conference and after the pictures, there's no follow-through. It then becomes very difficult to get real commitment on a sustainable basis. You can look at the Millennium Goals. We're almost there at the end date and see whether all of those commitments were fulfilled. I think that we have to work harder. And we need to recognize that some of the international federations need to be transformed. It still reflects the old patterns of colonial patterns as established. Let me talk about FIFA. Out of an executive of 24, 8 are from Europe. And so it must be very clear for you to get that budget approved, you have to get Europe's support, because if you don't, you're not going to get a majority. Now, Africa is the biggest bloc in FIFA, 54 African countries there. There are 4 representatives. On what basis? Because when those numbers were established, numbers of members on the executive, half of the continent was still part of, I don't know, the motherland. We were still the boys of the Queen. And when they spoke on our behalf too. Now the situation is different. There are 54 members from Africa, the biggest bloc. Europe is 48, and yet when you go to the executive, they have 8 and we have 4. If you go to the FIFA World Cup, Europe has 13 countries playing in the World Cup. Africa has 5. And so you can go on. So Africa will never win the World Cup, because if 5 African countries drop out, we have no more teams left. If, as happened here in South Africa, 7, because everyone is talking, yes, the 5 African teams are out, but 7 European teams dropped out in the first round, and they still had 8 left. Now, if we had 5 dropped out and we had 7 left, we would have had teams in the semi-final and maybe in the final and maybe have won it. In the Olympics, there are equal number of teams. And what happened? In 1996, Nigeria won the Olympics in Atlanta. In 2000, Cameroon won the Olympics. In China, Beijing, Nigeria was in the final. So this question of the unequal representation in the decision-making structures is the first problem. So that if you have equal numbers, then perhaps the African delegates coming from poorer and underdeveloped countries would be in a better position to articulate the kind of problems that you talk to. But, and we said this, that FIFA is not a bank. It generates its money not from producing products. It is human beings who participate to provide the platform to generate the money, and therefore that investment must be made in health, education, in other opportunities. So before I think we come to having an organization that can understand the issues that you raise, we need to transform the organization itself. And that's a huge challenge. That is a huge challenge. But it's a challenge that we must never believe cannot be won and overcome. The transformation of these international organizations must happen. They are not banks to make 3.5 billion profit and put it in the bank. For what good reason? And I must say that FIFA has begun to address this issue. Because we said, why do you have 3 billion in the bank and people don't have jerseys and boots to play the game? When in your constitution the first line says to promote and to develop the game throughout the world. That is what you must do. And FIFA has responded to that, to make investment. But I think there are so many other things. The question of accountability, transparency, how these decisions are taken. You may have seen that there's a lot of pressure now on the question of the awarding of these events. The Olympics, the World Cup. How are these events award.
But if one had to just follow the money, you know, I like this game, follow the money. So the
Yeah.
£2 billion that FIFA takes away from this country, I suppose the question that often comes, what is this money used for? Who benefits from it? I mean, the anecdotal reports you read in this country is that the people who made money around the World Cup in South Africa was consultants, many who came from overseas, was the construction companies, and was FIFA. And so, if one had to follow the money, and the point that you raised, transparency, you know, is there real transparency about what will happen to that $2 billion, how the decisions are made about how it is spent, and what is accountability once those decisions are made that the money is used properly? You know, because the image we have, and say the image I have of whether it's FIFA executives or whether it's Olympics executives is they live in luxury. I mean, they even have special lanes on the highways for them. They have they live in the most luxurious hotels. I mean, the image I have of them is like feudalism. They live in like lords of the manor, you know. You know, that's the impression that a lot of us who are ordinary citizens have of the people who are living and then claiming that they are interested in our development.
No, I think that as far as FIFA is concerned, I cannot speak on the IOC. But what is happening in FIFA is that the only event that generates the kind of profit, and in this case, the profit out of this event was $1.9 billion. Now, from that, they fund all the other competitions, the under-17 World Cup for boys or men, under-17 for girls, which is now in Azerbaijan, the under-20 men's World Cup, under-20 women's World Cup, and the Women's World Cup is funded from the Men's World Cup, because these events themselves are not generating huge profits. But so you'll see the commercial partners of the World Cup goes right through into these events as well. So that is one of the things they do. The second thing is that FIFA gives a grant to each one of the 208 member federations of $1 million to each of the federations. And then for the African continent, there was this Win in Africa for Africa, which they put in 120 million. And then because the World Cup was successful, they gave each national association a World Cup bonus of $550,000 each. So some of the money did go back to...
But that's like 5%
Yes.
of what they take away. But let's go follow the decision-making process. So we're trying to understand the methodology. For example, the decision to award Qatar the FIFA World Cup in 2022. I mean, I'm a trade union leader, and I know that 80% of workers in Qatar are immigrants, and they are banned from having trade unions representing them. So I'm trying to understand, is that not only are we saying that these mega events are events that are about business, but consciously you ignore completely in the decision-making process the issue of human rights. I mean, that's what it comes down to in my mind.
No, absolutely. That's why I said earlier is that historically, these mega events has never been the friend of human rights. And you can go back and see that it puts an acceptable face for a totally unacceptable system in these countries. So the national political situation in the country is not considered at all in coming to a decision to award an event. It's about the stadium, the roads, and the infrastructure. And that means that if you have the money and you promise to build and you give the guarantees, you deliver the event. At least we've moved away from just bricks and mortar to the environment. And the next challenge is to bring in to that consideration is the important question of human rights. It's not there, it's not even considered at all. And so you find who were competing against Qatar. It was the United States, Australia, Korea, Japan, and Qatar. And Qatar won by 12 votes to 8. They beat the United States in the last round.
What about corruption in these awarding processes? I mean, brown envelopes under the table. I mean, there's a lot of talk about it, even books written about brown envelopes full of bills, dollar bills, or maybe depending on which currency is stronger at that particular point. Is that, I mean, that's the general perception amongst us as a population, is that, wow, this thing is one of the most corrupt operations that we see.
It's not without a basis. The facts are there. The fact of the matter is, Amos Adamu, who comes from Nigeria, was banned for 2 years. He was found guilty. Diakite of Mali. My gripe is, I said, look, always in this situation, there's a bribe giver and a bribe taker. The poor can never bribe because they don't have money. They are recipients of the bribes. So what has happened? They've dealt with the African delegates. I have not seen anyone being dealt with from Europe. And that's why I'm saying this issue I cannot believe. So I say, if this is true, then no European country should have a jail. No European country, because there are no criminals there. Why do they have jails? It's just not real. So this perception that it is the Africans who are the corrupt people. And you go to the IOC, you'll find who are the IOC members who were severely dealt with, humiliated African IOC members. In FIFA, all of those who were banned were African. Now, at least, there is the names of others being dropped, and I hope they are going to be pursued.
What about this issue of sovereignty, Danny? I mean, this is a big issue. I mean, basically, organizations like IOC and FIFA, demand that countries give up their sovereignty. I mean, the way in which they remove, for example, local hawkers, local entrepreneurs, declare a whole radius of probably 1.5 kilometers around the stadium that no one can participate. And even where the merchandise is provided, I mean, one of the big criticisms here from the unions was that most of the T-shirts and paraphernalia came from suppliers in China, not from South Africa. So how difficult was that an issue for us here?
No, it was a big issue. You see, there is the so-called exclusive zone around the stadium. Now, there's also the security argument. They say we want an exclusive zone around the stadium because the fans and the players will come in and you must secure it. So you cannot allow a hawker to come and sell there because you don't know. There's no security checks, you don't know who are the people, and because of what happened around major events, there's a huge level of nervousness around the security, securing the event. So whether that was a convenient argument or not, if you allow them and then there's a bomb in a tomato box, you have that problem. And of course you have to consult the police and the intelligence structures and so on. And invariably when you talk to them, they will take a risk-averse position to say no. But what we've tried to say, look, the match is just 90 minutes, but people will only be here for 30 days. They go to the stadium to watch the match and they come back. So it's just passing trade. Let us find a space where the tourists can go through in non-match days. So we try to assist them. The question of products from China is something that we try to monitor, and you know that one of our board members was Vavi, was very strong on that. And one of the problems that we have, that even if you source, some of the suppliers would source from China, cut the label and put another label. And where we discovered those things, we immediately said, no, we terminate your contract. So we insisted that local producers, local manufacturers must be used. But it's very difficult because some of your suppliers source at a bigger margin for themselves, of course, but it's something that we try to be vigilant about.
What about, what would be your advice to the Brazilians? Because recently there's been a big drama about the differences between FIFA and even the IOC and the Brazilian government about sovereignty issues. And if you had to give some advice to the Brazilians about how to manage these huge monolithic enterprises like FIFA and the IOC, what advice would you give to them about that?
Well, you see, even FIFA accept, in any country, the national law of that country is the supreme law. The extent to which you are prepared to bring special regulations to accommodate the event, you have to consider the long-term impact. Because in law, once you create a precedent, others are going to come and exploit it. So this is a very, very difficult situation. On the side of FIFA, of course, they have to consider the interests of their commercial partners. Because if you allow ambush marketing, for example, they are going to reduce the amount that they'll pay you unless they know that when they come into this hall and the Coca-Cola, that they are not going to see Pepsi also in the same hall advertised. So those are issues that I think we cooperated, but we did look at the interest of SMMEs and so on, because an SMME, by definition, if they sell pop and gauze, is unbranded. So they cannot be seen to be in violation with McDonald's, because that auntie is not having a branded box with the food in. It's unbranded. So we made the point to say, no, man, you cannot convince me that small business there is competing with McDonald's, because they are not. They're in a different space. She's just local. From there she goes home. Does not even have a store with a name where you can buy. So it's not a competitor. But in every country, people have their own preference for what they eat. So either going to eat the food that she supplies, but they are not going to eat McDonald's. I don't know whether there's a McDonald's store in many of the townships, but townships that I go to, I don't see them. So they have made their own calculation that actually it's not, there's no strong business case for us to open here. So why do you then artificially block people when in fact you know there is not a conflict of interest or ambush marketing in that space? So these are issues that you have to just find out sometimes.
Okay, so I think let's just open up the conversation and take questions and comments, try and keep them short for the next hour, and so that we can have a conversation with Danny about it. And I think relating this to the fact that the segment is going to be used for a discussion around human rights in Brazil, and what are the lessons of both our successes and failures as a country in hosting a very successful FIFA World Cup in 2010. So I open it up to the audience.